So with that said, let's get started. Over to you, Stacy.
Thanks, Ashley. And welcome, everyone. As Ashley said, my name is Stacy Alexander, and I'm the Vice President of Thought Leadership here at AARP. And thank you so much for joining us today. Today's discussion is the third and final installment in a three-part virtual series on megatrends impacting older adults. Today, we're diving into a topic that is relevant, challenging, and incredibly exciting: the future of work and how it's evolving. Traditionally, many of us have followed a three-stage life model: education, career, and retirement, a very clear linear path. But as we face rapid technological changes and shifting demographics, that path is transforming. Today's workforce is both shrinking and aging, and we're seeing significant pressures on our supply chains, operational capacities, and overall workforce readiness. This means we must think differently, not just in how we approach employment, but also in how we approach learning, skill development, and our workplace environments. At the heart of this transformation is the need for continuous learning, adaptability, and resilience. In this new paradigm, skills once learned for a lifetime may need revisiting within even a few short years. We must prioritize not only the skills that can be automated, but also those deeply human qualities like critical thinking, empathy, and collaboration that are crucial in any era, but irreplaceable in the digital age. Today, we're proud to partner with a distinguished panel of experts from the private and public sectors who will share insights, policies, and labor market opportunities. Together, we'll explore how these changes impact in demand skills and discuss how employer strategies, workforce development initiatives, and public policy converge to meet these challenges in an equitable way for older adults. So, thank you again for being here. And we hope that this session not only informs, but also inspires. We look forward to embracing this learning journey together as we seek to make the future of work a space where all generations can thrive. Now, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Claudia Bonilla, who will moderate our panel with an incredible lineup of subject matter experts. Claudia is a policy and research manager at AARP, where she works with various teams within our enterprise to identify public policy priorities and positions, as well as drive public policy campaigns and advocacy strategies. Over to you, Claudia, and thanks again, everybody.
Thanks, Stacy. Welcome, everyone. We're so excited to have you with us. My name is Claudia Bonilla, and I'm lucky and excited to introduce our keynote speaker, Alexandra Hyland, Head of Functional Learning and Culture at Kraft Heinz. She works to develop authentic and robust learning and change strategies supporting employer brands, talent acquisition, engagement, diversity and inclusion, as well as learning and development. Alexandra leads a global team to create a culture of learning that enables and empowers employees to expand their capacity, own their learning, and execute with excellence while growing great careers within Graph. Alexandra, thank you so much for joining us today. We're so excited to have you. Let's get started. So can we start a little bit with telling us why learning and development is so important at Kraft Heinz?
It's such a great question to open with, and I kind of want to say, how much time have you got? I could talk about this all day. But, at Kraft Heinz, learning is considered a lifelong journey. We believe in providing opportunities for employees to learn and grow regardless of career stage, level, tenure. And we call this democratizing access to learning. Investing in our employees' growth and development is absolutely essential to driving our business success. We're striving to really create a culture that embraces change, leverages data, and invests really in our collective development, right? Our collective development to ensure enduring and long-term success, right? So particularly in this world where everything seems to be changing and shifting, what we want to do is equip our employees to be able to be resilient, and to have that long-term success. We really want to enable our employees to live one of all of our values, but in this instance, one of them in particular, which is we dare to do better every day. And that means really taking that personal ownership and accountability for learning and development. In fact, we created our own learning value proposition, right? You've probably heard of an employer brand or, other value propositions. But for us, our learning value proposition really strives to guide our work as we empower our employees to, we say, hashtag learn like an owner, meaning we want them to be able to execute in their role with excellence, accelerate their learning curve, because we are all on learning curves all the time, right? We want to be able to accelerate that. And then, as you said, grow great careers. And so by focusing on this as our value proposition, it really ensures and allows our employees to stay relevant, to adapt to new technologies, make meaningful impact on the organization, regardless, again, of age, stage, tenure, level, this culture of learning. And we spend a lot of time in the organization talking about culture of learning and really cultivating that culture. It also supports one of our values, which is we demand diversity. We demand diversity through respecting all employees, championing all elements and dimensions of diversity, and promoting diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And so learning ends up being a really great pathway for us to be able to do that.
Thanks, Alexandra. It's so exciting to hear about all the employer passion and mission around addressing learning opportunities. And then kind of diving a little bit deeper and building off of that, how does Kraft Heinz ensure learning and development opportunities are accessible and relevant to employees across all career stages? And what role does functional learning play in that?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's something I'm super passionate about, and goes back to this idea of democratizing access to learning. So we don't reserve learning just for certain groups, whether they be senior, whether they be new career, certain functions. We want to make sure that if you are hungry to learn, we hope that you are, that you have access to learning. And so we really are proud of our online learning platform. We call it Ownerversity, right? We want you to learn like an owner. And that provides essentially 24/7 access to learning, custom training, learning and development materials, external content, libraries, articles, in many, many different languages, really with this goal of being, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, if you want to learn, we want to be with you in that journey and make that possible. In order to support functional learning, we've established 9 functional academies that target employees or are directed at employees within each function of the business, ensuring that there's a home for learning for everyone. So if you're in finance, you've got Finance Academy, Sales Academy. These are open, of course, because we really believe in the importance of cross-functional learning and exposure. But finding that home for learning means that, again, you know where to go to have access to materials that have been carefully curated, for you. Sort of think of it like the digital streaming service of choice, if you will, but for learning, right? We want to be able to make it personalized as much as we can. So by organizing it by function, we can do that. Learning is not, strictly just online, though. Of course, we run lots of other programs, whether they be in person, whether they be live versus on demand. But that home for learning and that approach to ensuring that our learners, have access to the technical or functional skills that they need in order to really achieve the business strategy and grow in their career is very important. Equally so, though, we pair that with leadership development programs. So our leadership development programs cater to employees across, again, the organization, because we believe that everybody is a leader in some capacity. So we want to be ensure that we are growing those skills, as well as, if I may borrow from, an industry leader, Josh Burson, we also want to focus on power skills, which are formally referred to as soft skills, sometimes still are, but we like to call them power skills because they are so critical to enabling then the functional, the technical, the leadership skills. They need to all come together in harmony to truly accelerate that great career. So whether it's, strategic thinking, communication, emotional intelligence, all of those really rich and important topics. We offer a ton of learning initiatives and partnerships with, universities across the world, various e-learning, as I said. We've even done a 24-hour day of learning. We've actually done it yearly for the last several years, where, again, because we're a global organization, we've got folks in time zones around the world. So we want to make sure that we're coming to everybody live in their preferred time zone with access to great learning. We regularly have speakers, and so much more. We're always assessing the learning and engaging in a variety of feedback channels and mechanisms to make sure that we're constantly adjusting the content, the way we deliver the content, to make sure that it remains relevant and accessible, again, to learners across the organization and across sort of all ages and stages, and functions and tenure, et cetera.
Thanks, Alexandra. It's so interesting to hear about, the 24-hour day of learning and the opportunity that provides employees. And then diving a little bit deeper, how does Kraft Heinz approach upskilling and reskilling programs for its employees, and particularly older workers who may be adapting to new technologies or systems that may arise?
I think ultimately at the root, at the core, we approach upskilling and reskilling for everyone by recognizing the importance of just continuous learning in a rapidly changing work environment. It is changing for everybody all the time. And so what we really want to be focused on is this idea that we are all needing to be continuously learning. We want to create a culture of curiosity, because that then further inspires all of us to be seeking new ideas, new ways of working, thinking about, squiggly careers is a topic we like to talk about, which is to say that sort of strictly vertical, career path is still certainly out there and alive and well, but so are squiggly careers and ones that might move cross-functionally. The idea that skills today are so transferable, and probably more transferable than we realized in the past. We want to be making sure that we're equipping employees to be able to lift and shift those skills and apply them in different ways and in different places. And the thing that I find most interesting about this idea of upskilling or reskilling, it's not really about catching up, or closing a gap. The reality is, I saw this statistic and it sort of blew my mind that 44% of core skills are expected to change by 2027.
Mhm.
That's for everybody, right? So we all need to be thinking about, how can we, again, transfer our skills, apply them in different ways, and then really leverage, again, some of those power skills, critical thinking, problem solving, to be able to then, adapt to the changing world around us and the way in which jobs are changing. I think learning agility is something that is also super key for us to be able to keep pace. It's not really about what you know anymore. It's really about what you learn and how you learn it and how you can go and learn new things. So we're really focused on, how do we develop employees in their ability to learn, unlearn, or relearn topics, which, is really, I think, at the core of what's so important right now. Most of us can get access to the answer to just about anything at our fingertips, right? But it's, how do we think sort of abstractly about that information? How can we learn to apply it in different ways? We're excited because right now we're really beginning to move with speed with how we are onboarding Gen AI and employees to use generative AI and understand it, that responsible and ethical use, really, thinking about the foundations of prompt engineering. That's new for everybody. So we're all learning that, together, and thinking about, how are we putting humans in the loop from the very beginning, ensuring that technology enhances, not replaces, human decision making. And it reminds me back many years ago, at the time of the start of the internet, and the idea that, could we really trust it, and was it ethical to use, or all of those questions. We're seeing them again, right? So we know sort of what to do. And it really is a question, again, of teaching people how to use a tool, how to apply critical thinking to assess the information that's coming out, but then applying that wonderfully human set of skills, those power skills, to really bring it to life. So we're very excited, and we're all beginners. We're all adopting that beginner's mindset, really, because the technology is evolving every day. And so I think embracing that mindset of curiosity, embracing that beginner's mindset, gives us a playing field where we're all playing together and we're learning together, and we are being encouraged and rewarded in the same way to learn together.
Thanks, Alexandra. Going into our last question, just based off your experience with, this issue area, workforce development, and the work being done at Kraft Heinz, what are some strategies you see as most effective for integrating older workers' unique experiences into cross-functional learning initiatives? And how does Kraft Heinz foster these kinds of opportunities?
Yeah. I think that the beauty is when our workforce represents our consumer base, it's best for the business. And because of that, for that, we are always thinking about how to design cross-functional learning that brings together employees from across the business, age, stage, all the things we've talked about, to really leverage and harness and embrace that variety of perspectives and experiences to create these really rich learning environments where we're sharing knowledge, we're challenging assumptions, we're developing innovative solutions. One of the most powerful things for me is the way in which we engage with our subject matter experts, who tend to have incredibly deep tenure, deep experience and knowledge. It's fantastic when we get to partner with them to deliver learning, to capture that prize, that knowledge and experience that they have, and then find exciting ways to bring it to the organization and make it relevant to all. Recently we created a program for a very niche part of our business, something that was, very, very specific. And we had two incredible subject matter experts with depth of knowledge that, I don't even know that we could ever get to the bottom of it. And yet we were able to work with them to capture that lightning in a bottle, create a program that allows us to celebrate that expertise and share it, and create that whole next sort of generation of employees who are learning and upskilling and carrying on these very important, areas of the business. It was so much fun and really cool to know that we're locking in a legacy of knowledge that has been such an important part of the business. And our trainee program affords a lot of great opportunities for that bi-directional learning, from whether it's across, again, ages, stages, tenure, function. We really believe and take pride and joy in the excitement we see when you see that learning happen sort of in that multi-directional kind of way. And so really, I think it's about trying to provide a menu of options, learning in all kinds of different ways, different modalities, different mediums, recognizing, different experts, ways of learning, and so on. And one thing that I love to do is sort of break the rules a little bit and think about how do we bring together these 6 generations of employees that are in the workforce today together into something that is going to surprise and delight. And one of my favorite examples is through COVID, we continue to get requests for learning. And one of the topics we get regularly is Excel. All of us could get better at how we use Excel. And rather than sort of going down a tried and true path, we actually engaged a TikToker. Now, I'm not cool enough to be on TikTok necessarily, but we found out about this person and they were incredible, and we brought them in, and across all participants, it was seen as being one of the top programs that we had run, in that time frame. And so I think being able to learn from our learners and the ways in which they want to learn across, the business makes it better for all of us. I like to think about good old Maslow and his hierarchy of needs, and we all want to feel good about what we're learning. We all want to feel good that we're growing And even at its simplest form, that tomorrow is a little easier than today. So we're not so different in that way. And so we love to learn across the business, learn with our business resource groups, and really try to put together, again, a colorful mosaic of learning opportunities that champions this idea that we embrace a culture of learning, we celebrate it, and we really sort of seed that culture of curiosity in our learners as well.
Thank you so much, Alexandra, for your insight and your time today. Your input's incredibly valuable as outlining the landscape, identifying, potential challenges that may come up, but also outlining the opportunities, the employer strategies, and all the work that Kraft Heinz doing to address and support skills development. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Now I would like to hand it over to my colleague, Jen Schramm, to welcome our panelists. Jen serves as a senior policy advisor at AARP Public Policy Institute, where, as part of the financial security team, she identifies policy challenges and opportunities related to workers age 50 plus. Over to you, Jen.
Thank you, Claudia. And thank you, Claudia and Alexandra, for such an insightful take on the employer perspective on the skills economy and older workers. So now it's my pleasure to turn to our panel discussion. We're going to explore workforce development and policy solutions. And we've curated a great set of panelists who are at the forefront of the skills economy and labor market and older workers. So first, let's welcome our first panelist, Kermit Kaliba. Kermit is Strategy Director for Employer-Aligned Programs at the Lumina Foundation. He leads a portfolio designed to increase the number of occupational short-term credential and AA degree programs. And then next, I'd like to introduce Amanda Cage, who is the President and CEO of the National Fund for Workforce Solutions. Amanda regularly serves as an expert source on economic equity and workforce issues for several national media publications, including the Financial Times, New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, all the big hitters. And finally, our last panelist, Luke Ioquinto, is a research associate at MIT Age Lab and the co-author of GRASP, The Science of Transforming How We Learn. He's also the author of a new book that really sounds very interesting, Longevity Hubs, Regional Innovation for Global Aging, along with MIT Age Lab founder Joseph Coughlin. And this book explores localized hotspots of innovation for and by older adults, both in the US and all around the world. So welcome, everyone. Let's get started. I'm going to start with you, Kermit, because we want to talk about employer-aligned programs that are specifically aimed at addressing the needs of older workers. So how does Lumina Foundation's approach to employer-aligned programs address the needs of older workers?
Sure, and thank you so much for having me on this panel. It's great to be on here with old friends and new friends, and always an admirer of AARP's work in this space. So briefly, I'll just share. Lumina Foundation we're the nation's largest private foundation focused exclusively on post-secondary attainment. If you've heard of us at all, you've probably probably know us because of our national goal that we set back in 2009. We wanted to get to a nation where 60% of US adults between the ages of 25 and 64 had some form of post-secondary degree or recognized credential of value. And I'm pleased to say that since we originally set that goal back in 2009, working with our partners in higher education and the employment community and others, we've seen a 16 percentage point increase in credential attainment since we set that goal back in 2009. So nearly 55% of US adults have some form of recognized degree or credential. Now, my focus at Lumina is really around short-term credentials, and that is credentials that can be earned, usually be earned in less than the 2 years it would take to get an associate's degree or the 4 years it usually takes to get a bachelor's degree. Those credentials can include certificates, certifications, badges, micro-credentials. There's a number of different terms for them. And I primarily work with community and technical colleges, which, if you're not familiar with them, there are about 1,200 community and technical colleges across the country, and they offer a range of different options, from associate's degrees and bachelor's degrees in some cases, to technical training, including short-term workforce development training in a range of industries. Although the credentials that we focus on can be offered by other entities, including community-based organizations, labor unions, and others. Now, while we don't work exclusively on strategies around older workers, I do think short-term credentials are an important part of the landscape as we think about upskilling and reskilling in the future. One of the things we know is that technologies and processes are changing a lot faster than they used to. Where we're seeing whole industries emerging during our working careers. You think about my favorite example is 2007 was the introduction of the first iPhone. So many of us were already in the workforce before that life-changing technology emerged. And just think about how much has changed about the way we interact or don't interact with one another, depending on the circumstances. We also know that for many older workers, going back to school, particularly if it requires going back for a 2-year or a 4-year degree, is a pretty daunting challenge. And so we know a lot of workers are looking for ways to upgrade their skills relatively quickly, and do so in a way that allows them to keep working, keep up with their family obligations, but also get the skills and the competencies they need to be successful. So in our work, we focus on working with colleges, with employers, with other stakeholders, to really focus on how do we make sure that credentials are aligned with with employer demands? How do we make sure that those credentials are being offered in a way that is accessible to all learners, including older learners? How do we make sure that they're being offered in a way that integrates with life, including both work and family obligations? And what are the strategies, what are the policies, what are the practices that we need in order to make sure that those credentials deliver the value that workers and employers are looking for?
Great. We'll kind of sticking with that topic of effective strategies that kind of align with the needs of employers. The next question is for Amanda. What are the most effective strategies that you've seen in your work with the National Fund for Workforce Solutions that encourage employers to make those investments?
Sure. So before I start, I do also want to say thank you for having me as part of this conversation. And thank you. I got my AARP card last week in the mail. And I thank you for all the benefits that come along with being a member of AARP, which are amazing. So this is a little plug for a little commercial for AARP. So I have the pleasure of leading an organization, just to give a little bit of a background about the National Fund. We're a national network of a little over 30 collaborators around the country who work on envision a world where all workers have the resources they need to thrive. Race does not dictate employment outcomes, and all jobs are good jobs. And as part of this all jobs is good jobs piece of our work, we do a lot of work directly with employers, trying to help them create good jobs. And I'm assuming most of the folks that are on this call are good employers, provide good jobs, or work with employers that provide good jobs. But most of what we focus on is helping employers think differently about how they design their jobs around the workers that they work with, to make sure that they're supporting them in the best way that they can. And a strategy that has been really successful for us is human-centered design. And we have a guide called Human-Centered Design for the Workplace. I'll drop it in the chat throughout this conversation. But we've done this work with a number of employers around the country, employers in lots of different kinds of industries. But it really is a mechanism and a process that allows employers to look at some of the very important outcomes that they have for themselves and their business, but how do they link that to the needs of their workers? And so, oftentimes we think of being a good employer, you provide sort of this stock group of benefits, things like retirement benefits or healthcare benefits, or maybe if you're really lucky, educational benefits. But we also have pretty strong stereotypes about what we think people need at different stages of their career, whether they're entry level or mid-career or later stage. And human-centered design can actually help employers tease out the real needs of their workers so that they can best respond to those. And I'll give a really concrete example in the sort of financial wellness space, because I think there's a lot to be learned in terms that could be drawn into the education space. When employers provide something like retirement benefits, they're really thinking about their employees' financial wellness, right? And they think of that as being like the tool to help get somebody to their financial wellness. But when we do human-centered design, what we will often find out are people want all sorts of different kinds of access to financial wellness, right? It may not be a retirement account. It may be that they need financial coaching or short-term loans or credit building or student loan repayments, all of these different techniques and tools and products that they could be using to support their workers that's different than the one tool they've been taught to use. And so I think as we think about educational benefits and think about how to entice employees into learning, that this human-centered design can really be used as a way to understand what the needs are, but also the way to deliver upon those needs for your workers.
That's such an excellent segue to our talking with our third panelist, actually, because it goes from the aligning with the needs of your employees to kind of aligning with the needs of the learner, which Luke is what you do, which is what you write about. So my question for you, because in your book, Grasp, and in your work at the MIT Age Lab, you are all about exploring how to make learning cognitive user-friendly. So what can employers and educators do to facilitate learning that is more user-friendly, especially for older adults in the context of this conversation?
Yeah, no, a great question. And let me do what everyone else did first of all, and thank you all for having me here. And thanks to the AARP and my friend and colleague Julie Miller in particular. So thank you. So it's so funny. So I work at the MIT Age Lab, and one of our main, sort of our main ethos around technology, at least, is that you never blame an older person when they can't use a technology. If an older person can't use a technology, that's not a bad technology user. That is a bad technology, period. And with Grasp, which I wrote with the head of open learning at MIT, and the goal there is just basically to provide as much learning to as many people as possible, as effectively as possible. We applied the same ethos. You don't blame the learner when a breakdown happens. You work to figure out where that breakdown is happening and get rid of it. So Grasp is a really cool opportunity for me as a science writer, because I wrote this with one of the vice presidents of MIT, and what I got to do is basically have really good access to MIT neuro and cognitive scientists. And what I learned is basically neuro and cognitive science is kind of like a telescoping discipline that starts at the cell, and we're talking brain systems, and we're talking cognitive psychology, and then like ultimately you move in terms of talking about learning, you move into social considerations and so on and so on. And what I learned talking to these scientists is that at every one of these levels, from the cell on up, there are potentially show-stopping issues that can stop learning in its tracks. So at the very cell level, for instance, that's we're talking about the fundamentals of how memories are encoded. It turns out we are often not learning at the right schedule for how to make a really long-lasting memory, and that's as true for very tiny organisms as it is for us. But we could talk about the brain systems level, where issues like dyslexia start to appear, or curiosity or lack thereof, it can be found in the brain systems level, into cognitive psychology and even metacognitive considerations, like when you have a judgment, a feeling of knowing that you learned something that you might not actually know that well. That can be an issue that can stop learning in its tracks as well. So our goal is to get rid of these roadblocks that pop up anywhere in this sort of telescoping stack of disciplines. And for older adults in particular, I think the temptation is often to say, oh, something about crystallized and fluid intelligence or something. And my experience at the MIT Age Lab says that's not actually where the nitty gritty can be found. I'm sure a lot of folks on this call will be familiar with Laura Carstenson's work over at Stanford on socio-emotional selectivity theory, which is this idea that as we age, we surround ourselves with things that are really meaningful to us. I think that's a really good angle for learning as well, and for designing good learning experiences. So by that I mean, so in the context of that theory, it's often applied to surrounding yourself with close members of family and so on. But I think in terms of learning, it's really helpful to be learning things that are deeply contextualized in what you care about. So not so abstract. And so this has a rich and deep history in education, going back to John Dewey, where you don't just learn fractions, you learn to bake using fractions. And it's often applied to children because we think that, oh, children learning can't, they really need this extra sugar to help the medicine of learning go down. But I think it's a great approach for everyone of any age, and maybe even more critically for older adults. What motivates you? What is making you want to learn this thing? What is motivating you in your career to want to get this next ounce of learning into your brain? I think focusing on the motivation and triggering curiosity can be a really powerful tool.
Yeah, that's something that we've, in our work with older learners, especially older learners going back for their degrees, we're like they have a very strong intrinsic motivation. They're not necessarily aligned to some outside goal. It's just very meaningful for them. So that's interesting to hear you kind of talk about the importance of motivation. Okay, now let's talk about skills pathways. And I'd like to hear from each one of you on this. And I'll start with Kermit. How can workforce development programs partner with employers to create skills pathways, especially those that recognize prior learning, which is really relevant often for older workers and older learners?
Sure, thank you. I appreciate this. I'm going to sort of talk about two trends or strategies that we've been kind of keeping an eye on. One is sort of the emergence of what's called skills-based hiring, and this is a term that can mean different things to different people. But at its most basic level, I think it's about this recognition that in many instances we are requiring degrees or levels of education that aren't really necessary to do the job well. That if you can have the competencies and the skills to do a job and not necessarily require a degree to do that. But because of the customs that we've built around the bachelor's degree and beyond, we create barriers to entry, and that limits our pool of talent. So you're starting to see increasingly both public sector and private sector employers looking at this question of how do we look past the degree as sort of our entry point and look at the real skills and competencies that we need as employers, and assessing the skills and the competencies of potential workers or current workers to make sure that to see if they might be a good fit for this job. And I think I mentioned public sector. There's been if you've been watching the news at all, you've seen there's been more than 20 states over the course of the past couple of years that have lifted bachelor's degree requirements for a number of public sector jobs, and I think you're going to see more of that as time passes, as this momentum gains. So how can we work to take advantage of that? I think education and training providers need to be engaging with employers to really say, what are the skills and the competencies that you really need to do a job? And, as Amanda was talking about, sort of thinking about how do you design a job? How do you think about what it takes to do the job? And making sure that you're building training and other opportunities that help make sure that you're teaching those skills and those competencies, and doing so as rapidly and as effectively as possible. I think for employers, the challenge is to engage in that process, to really be thinking about what is really truly necessary to do this job well, and how do we think about engaging education and training providers in a way that allows us to maximize the talents of our potential workforce. And I think what's important about this is it means sometimes looking at worker populations that you've overlooked, including older workers. There's been a tendency to sort of say we're not going to look over here because we have enough talent in our current pool. I think that's no less and less true as we see a tight labor market, and so I think it's this is going to be an important strategy as we move forward. The other strategy that we're familiar with that I think is useful to for employers to be thinking about is credit for prior learning, which is exactly what the term means. It sounds like. So we know that people gain skills and knowledge and education through participating in traditional higher education, but they also do so on the job, they do so in life, and they do so in other areas. And I think one thing that colleges, including particularly community colleges, have been working to do is figure out how to award academic credit for those life and work experiences. And I think this is really important and really promising, because I think, again, as we're thinking about how you continue to grow and attract talent, one way to be thinking about attracting and retaining talent is building and credentialing the learning that your current workforce has, so that they are better able not just to succeed in their current role, but potentially to advance in roles within the organization. I think I know we were going to probably talk a little bit about sort of career ladders and stackability moving forward. I think that is something to be thinking for employers to be thinking about is, are you looking at the talent that you already have in-house and thinking of them as a career advancement for them in the same way that you're looking to get recruit talent from the outside, and thinking about how you structure educational opportunities and how you structure access to educational opportunities can really make a difference in whether folks feel welcome, whether they feel like they can do the job, and whether they want to stay.
Amanda, I imagine you're at the National Fund. This is something you do a lot of.
Yes, and I was going to jump in next, mostly because Kermit stole my answers. But I do want to double down on those, because I do think there's an interesting thing that's happening right now in the labor market, partially driven by what Kermit was talking about, which was like skills-based hiring. And there is sort of a national campaign I know that we're part of, and other workforce development entities are part of, called Tear the Paper Ceiling, which is really how do we get away from this place where we have created a barrier through having people have particular, a bachelor's degree as a proxy for skill, that it really does lock a lot of people out of the labor market, and at a time when employers really desperately need these skills. And so, I think it's really important that we sort of change the narrative broadly about that. But what has really happened is there's been this spillover effect in organizations. And so we work, we can see in Fortune 500 companies where folks are thinking about like apprenticeships and just really thinking about different mechanisms for how they train talent or how they recruit talent. And it includes thinking about skills and competencies, right? And so when you think about skills and competencies, as opposed to making sure people have the right piece of paper, it opens up a lot of avenues in an HR setting to think differently about those things. I would add to that conversation from the training side of the house, we have this really bad tendency to always think that something is completely new, especially when there are big changes in the labor market, right? And I'll give an example. I sit on a advisory committee for the energy transition for the U.S. Energy Department. And if you're thinking about energy transition and you're thinking about new jobs that are like solar jobs or clean battery jobs, people tend to think these are brand new jobs that had never existed before. And really they're augmentations of jobs that already exist. And I think the more that we acknowledge that a lot of technology and a lot of sort of new industry advancements are really about augmenting current technology, it helps us to think differently about how people access those skills, including incumbent workers who already have some of those skills. And so I think there's just different ways that we need to think about when we talk about workforce development, when we talk about workforce training, that we're building off of what people already have. And oftentimes that's a really, really solid foundation.
It is. The hard part is capturing it, right? So Luke, I wondered if you might have a perspective on this from like the learning styles, the research that you've done, maybe like a case study that you could share about creating skills pathways that that are opening up opportunities for workers as they get older.
Yeah, no, of course. And so, one thing that came up throughout as we were thinking through this is issues around creating new credentials, because creating new credentials outside of the traditional bachelor's, master's, PhD system is a very valuable thing to want to do. But part of the challenge is, how do you get employers to care about these things? And part of the challenge is, if there's a wild west of organizations awarding these credentials, some of these are going to reflect a more rigorous course of study than others. So how do you really get employers to recognize that, like, someone has gone through a very rigorous course of study and is really learn their stuff? And then as kind of a side issue is, when we're talking about people who are not in the sort of the traditional K-12 and college learning ages, or non-traditional college students and into older age groups, at what point are we talking about online education to some degree, and when is that appropriate and when is that not? So a case study that we had that, like, actually, as luck would have it, originated down the hall from where I'm sitting right now, is this originally MIT, but now it's more than 25 colleges and universities are doing this. It's a program called the MicroMasters. I don't know if anyone's heard of this, but basically the idea is you take a master's degree program and you break it in half and you put the first half online, and you make it's very rigorous. It has to be very rigorous. Like, it's not a joke. And then what was done here down the hall. So this was a master's degree in supply chain management, but now it's in any number of courses of study. But you have this online course that's open to thousands, potentially millions, but many thousands of students. And some small percentage of students who are the top performers in the online course get automatic admission into the second half of the master's program, which is on campus. So you have this cohort of students who just get into the MIT master's program and do the full, I think it's 3 semesters. And then you have the second cohort who do the first half online and do a second half on campus if they so choose to come to MIT and grab a master's degree. And if not, they still have the MicroMasters, which is the first half. And the intuitive beauty of this is that it's sort of us in the way that we used to back currencies on gold. It sort of says, well, here's the gold. It's an MIT master's program. People tend to see that as a valuable thing. This MicroMasters is good enough to get you into that master's program. So if you perform well in the MicroMasters and you get a credential, then you can apply that right to the job market or right to the master's program. And it's a little tricky to look at performance, but these people who took the non-traditional route into the master's program, I mean, it's been running for several years now. They've done very well, very well. And they've also trended a little older than the traditional students. So it's not necessarily designed for older adults per se, but this is something that is a little more flexible in terms of on-roading people into a master's degree, or just right into the workforce with this MicroMasters.
It's such an interesting approach. I'm monitoring the chat here. Well, I'm not monitoring it, but I'm looking at some of the chat comments, and I see that some people talk about some of the experiences older workers have of kind of being shut out from training and learning and different skills opportunities. And that kind of brings me to the next issue I'm hoping we can cover before we have to wrap, which is equity. How do these issues around older workers intersect with equity? Because there are factors on all sorts of different factors related to this, and populations that have fewer opportunities. So I don't know, Amanda, do you have some thoughts you can share with us?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I want to sort of flip a little bit of this on its head, because I think we've we have sort of leaned into a little bit of the stereotype about older workers, which they're like a little bit of skill deficient, and like getting them the skills they need is like a jump. And I actually think we're like entering a space where older worker skills are incredibly valuable, and maybe more valuable than they've ever been. And I think that has to do with a lot of, sort of just broader trends that are happening in the labor market. But part of the effect of this is, I think that there's just some layer of discrimination that happens for older workers in the chat. And when there are trends that create such a desperate demand for skills and a particular level of skills, you can't discriminate as much. And I'll be clear about that. Like, we have trends like there's a really tight labor market that's happening. And, my entire time in workforce development, we've always been talking about recruitment. And for the last 5 years, we've been talking about retention. And that is a fundamental different labor market than has been happening in the past. We're seeing a demographic shift that is big and meaningful. We've been talking about the gray tsunami for a long time. I would say it's now like a mega tsunami, where we're looking at, in particular, industries like a real dire skill exiting, right? So construction, manufacturing, healthcare, people are leaving fields and taking the skills with them. And that just creates a great demand for people who have skills and experience, of which older workers make up a big piece of that. And so I think that there's some level of that kind of discrimination that I think is real, very real, that people are mentioning in the chat. Sometimes what really pushes back against that kind of discrimination is when employers feel like they don't have other options. And I think that's something we're going to start seeing more and more of.
Yeah, these demographic shifts are bound to have a big influence. And one other factor that I think will have a big influence, I'm hoping we can fit in one more question, is about technological advancements and how technology might drive some of the opportunities, maybe some of the barriers as well. I don't know if Kermit or Luke, you might have some thoughts about the role of technology in all of this, just to help close us out.
Just real quick, I mean, I think we have just building off of something that Luke mentioned, the importance of contextualized learning, right? So people learn best, particularly when it comes to workforce development, workforce skills, when they're learning in the context of how they're going to use those skills at the work site. And so I think as technology is introduced, as new technologies are introduced, it's going to be important to make sure that that education and training is offered utilizing the exact technology, equipment, procedures that are going to be utilized at the worksite. And that's something I think employers should be thinking about when they engage with education and training providers is, do you have access to these technologies? Are you able to access this equipment? Do you use the same thing that we're going to be the same processes, technology that we're going to be using? And if not, that's actually something you can help those education and training providers with, if they're dealing with tight budgets, and making sure that they are able to sort of understand, and the learners are able to understand how those technologies are being utilized, so that they don't have that lack of familiarity when they show up on the job site. So it's just something to think about, is like one role that you play in addition to identifying what skills you need is how is this going to be used in the workplace, and how can we be supportive of that transition?
Yeah, Luke, anything to add to that?
I would just add, I'm thinking from a sort of a global workforce perspective. There's this great book called The Great Demographic Reversal that's all about how as societies age around the world, there's going to be a relatively fewer workers compared to the number of consumers, and it's going to have all kinds of effects. Economist who just won the Nobel Prize, Daron Acemoglu, has looked at different countries and compared it across countries, and seen that countries with aging populations tend to invest more in automation in their industrial base and across industries. And so I think companies are going to have a choice whether to make these sort of capital investments and investments in their institutional knowledge that's contained in their older workers, or are they going to make the mistake of discriminating against their older workers? And ultimately, I do believe time is going to tell which approach is going to be more effective.
Yeah, these next few years are going to be very interesting in all kinds of ways around these issues. There's so many big trends driving this space. So I would love to keep talking, but I have to wrap here. I want to thank you all for such an interesting, insightful conversation. We're so lucky to have all of you to talk to about these issues today, and their impact on older workers. Before I hand off to Stacy to close us out, I think we might have time for a quick poll. We wanted to do a quick poll on the 2025 focus areas for our megatrends. Are we able to do that? Yes. Okay, I see the poll is up. So if you wouldn't mind quickly responding to this megatrends poll, just vote on trends of interest for future megatrend series. We talked about some of these today: shifting demographics, advances in technology, social, economic, and political forces, and then obviously learning and skills was center stage today. So if you wouldn't mind filling that in, that will really help us shape the future of our megatrend series. Okay. And so thank you so much for your responses to that. It's really informative and helpful for our future programming. And now I'll hand it over to Stacy.
Thanks, Jen. Thank you all for joining us today. This was a very insightful and thought-provoking discussion on the reframing of lifelong learning. It's been an honor to have such a diverse group of thought leaders engage with us on this critical issue. As we conclude this year, I encourage you all to revisit the conversations from the previous 2 virtual events we've had earlier in the year. A recording of this discussion will also be made available post-event. And please share your insights that you gained today and advocate for policies that support economic mobility and look for opportunities to contribute to a more inclusive future of work. Again, thank you for this conversation. We look forward to your continued involvement. It's clear that we have a lot of work to do, and your collaboration will help the efforts to tackle income inequality and build a better future for all workers. So have a wonderful day. Thank you for your commitment to making a positive impact. And I'll hand things off to Ashley. Thanks.
Thank you, Stacy. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. This now concludes part 3 of the Megatrends series, Reframing Lifelong Learning, the Skills Economy, and Older Workers. We will see you all soon.